Hey Wargammers, it's Chris with Wargame Creations, and today I'm going to be showing you some of the settings I use in Cura Slicer to achieve some high quality 3D prints that are ready for the battlefield. So quality, I have at 0.2. That usually is a good medium, unless you have something that has like really fine details in it. Which, I mean, at that point I guess you could use a resin printer if it had insanely fine details. Initial layer height 0.2. I just like to keep that about the same as my layer height. Essentially what this does is it keeps this distance off of wherever you zero your print bed at. So if you level your print bed at ideally 0 millimeters, when the print head goes down to extrude the plastic, it will actually leave a 0.2 millimeter gap. So that can be adjusted accordingly. Like I said, I can make another video getting into all of this stuff later. Line width I leave at 0.4. I usually just leave that the same as the nozzle, which I just use a 0.4 nozzle. It seems to do fine. I mean, if you're not worried about quality, you can run a 0.6 nozzle and it'll change all this to 0.6 and it'll produce a lot faster prints. They just, like, some areas in here won't have as high of detail necessarily. Initial layer line width 100%. Wall thickness 0.8 millimeters, so twice the amount of what my nozzle is. 2 wall line count. Outer wall wipe distance 0.2, so basically the nozzle will go into the wall to wipe off any extra filament that's left. Outer wall inset, I had this changed, but it was doing some funny stuff to the way that the model was slicing, so I left it alone. If your other settings are dialed in, usually this isn't a big issue. Optimize wall printing order. I do that so that the slicer can choose the smartest way to print the walls, basically. If you do outer before inner walls, things get a little goofy. Alternate extra wall, that's good I guess if you're trying to increase strength. It just uses more material and more time. Compensate wall overlaps. I have all of these checked, inner and outer. Basically, if it's already put down a wall and it knows that there's a wall there, it'll extrude less plastic, so that way you don't have giant globs on the side. Minimum wall flow 0%. Let's see. Fill gaps between walls everywhere. Filter out tiny gaps. Print thin walls. That's a good one, especially when you start getting into like little pieces like this, where, let's see. Find a good example here. This is a good example of printing thin walls. Essentially what happens is, as you can see, this nozzle at its 0.4 thickness comes in and it almost, I guess you could say, like, makes 2 walls, but it's not quite enough. Not quite enough, so it kind of smashes the 2 walls together. So in that case, it would maybe be better to print a thin wall, but since this is one outer wall, it will extrude less filament, kind of how I was talking about a second ago with the other setting. But that is how you get tiny little details on certain parts of the object, is print thin walls. Horizontal expansion, I leave this alone. This gets into geometry stuff, which ideally, if you have a model that's made correctly, a lot of these settings can be left alone. A lot of what you're going to be tweaking is like wall count, infill percentage, things like that. Just once you have the finer details dialed in, things will make more sense. Top surface skin layers. I mean, this kind of goes back and forth, I guess. Really depends. I mean, one usually does fine. If you have like a large overhang, like this area in here even is like, I would consider small, but if you have anything that's larger than what your printer's capability is, like if you needed to bridge this gap across here and there was no support down here, the first layer would go down and start to kind of droop and maybe come back up. By the time it got up here, it would connect and you'd have some droopage, and then it would go across and then it would lay it down and it would all kind of start drooping, and then once you got a few layers up, then it would build on top of itself and then it would smooth out, which gets into like another setting that I'll talk about here in a second. So top surface skin layers, these usually have enough support underneath of them that the top layers and bottom layers section. So top layers obviously are going to be your top layers here, any of this yellow stuff. So it will have 3 layers of other support to its 1 layer of skin, which skin is layered on a different way than the top and bottom layers. Top and bottom thickness 0.8 millimeters. Again, I just keep this divisible by whatever my layer height is, which I believe it will automatically calculate some of this stuff out for you. So that would be 0.8 millimeters, which doesn't make sense because yeah, I don't know. I guess this becomes null and void because technically if it has 3 top layers at 0.2 it would be 0.6, and if it has 2 bottom layers at 0.2 it would be 0.4. So this number should also be grayed out. But like I said, top layers 3, bottom layers 2. This is going to be the number of layers that stick on the build plate is going to be your bottom layers. So when it's slicing the model, that yellow is basically 1, and then it goes in the opposite direction. See, 1. It's kind of hard to control this. 1, 2. So there you go. And then the top layers, like I said, it's the same kind of thing, just on the top. So then once it gets to the top, it'll build 3 top layers on top of what this is. This is infill support, which we'll get to that in a second. Okay. Top bottom pattern lines, basically that just keeps them running in one direction like that. I don't mess with any of the other settings. I mean, you can do other patterns if you're looking for specific things, but I mean, if you're going to be sanding this down and painting this, a lot of these settings are just to get structural integrity of the plastic model. Same thing, bottom lines, top lines, monotronic top bottom order. So like I said, that basically it runs them, you know, left to right this time, and then up to down next time, so that way they're always overlapping, like a cross stitch kind of pattern. Just helps make it a little bit more stable, helps things connect better together, and you won't have a model that shifts and, I guess, like peels apart at the seams. You want as little seams as possible when it comes to, like, when you build a Lego house, you don't put all of the same number of bricks on top of each other, you interlock them. So it's the same kind of thing. You're interlocking as much of the plastic together with everything that you're doing as you can. Let's see. No skin and Z-gaps. So when the model has small vertical gaps of only a few layers, should normally be skin around those layers in a narrow space. Enable the setting to not generate the skin if the vertical gap is very small. This improves printing time and slicing time. It technically leaves infill exposed to there. I don't know why. Let's see. Turn that off. Like I said, these settings change according to the model, so I'm not 100% sure what I would have done that for, but it hasn't affected anything so far, so I'm not too worried about it. Let's see. Okay, so extra skin wall count. So this helps as well with smoothing out surfaces. Basically, this extra skin wall count is this yellow line right here. You can set this number to however many walls you want. It'll go around and go around, and then it'll go through and fill it back in, basically. I don't have an ironing enabled because I had it enabled at one time and it takes significantly longer. So 4 hours and 48 minutes. If you see, well, I'm a liar, I guess. So okay, well, that's why. So if you can do iron only highest layer, or you can do iron all. So if you do iron all and then you slice it, so as you see, you can play around with the settings, do what you want. If you have something that is a large flat surface and you do ironing, it's going to significantly improve the slicing time. Let's see. Skin overlap percentage. That was what I was kind of explaining with the infill connecting into itself. Or not the infill, the skin. So you see these lines here, basically how far in they come to these lines here. I have it set to 20% so that way they hold on pretty well. You could probably bump it down to 5 or 10%. It would be okay. It really, like I said, it comes down to how like dialed in your printer is, because your printer will only do what you tell it to do. So the amount of filament it's extruding and the amount of distance that it's moving when it's being told to move and extrude, those being dialed in is crucial for the printer to print accurately. I mean, a lot of these settings don't really mean anything unless your printer is fully dialed in. I mean, not even fully dialed in, but just, I mean, pretty close. And I can make more videos showing some of the like benchies and some of the things that I use to kind of fine-tune my printer, which I use an Ender 3, but let's see. Skin overlap, like I said, this is a calculated number based on this percentage, so it comes up with this amount of number. Skin removal width, 0.8 millimeters, basically any skins that are smaller than 0.8 millimeter, which I just did double the nozzle size so that it wouldn't make movements as skins if it's 0.8 millimeters, because one wall one direction and one wall the other direction would make it 0.8. So if you could just run them as walls, it will save you the time of having to deal with the skin factor when it comes to anything that is smaller than 0.8. So like when you're slicing, I don't know, when you're slicing stuff like this and you start getting into these like smaller little cracks, some of these might render as skins, and it you know, if you have 1,000 of those on a model, it might take a lot more time. So 0.8 is what I use for all of that. Maximum skin angle for expansion, 90%. Infill. I have my infill density set to 5%. You can bump this up to 10% if you're planning on doing anything crazy with it. So I'll say it was about 4 hours and 48 minutes before. So 5 hours and 8 minutes. And I know a lot of this doesn't seem like a significant amount of time, which it's not, I guess. To, like, if you're one person with a 3D printer and you're printing this stuff for your own personal use and you want it to be like very heavy duty, I mean 10-20% infill will like make it pretty solid. I mean, there's really no need for Wargame Terrain to like have such a solid object. I don't know. So I roll with 5%. It's a happy medium. Some things, if it's not enough infill, I might bump up the infill. Like if it's, I guess more specifically, like a super large object, then I might do a little bit more infill, just because it takes a little less time to go through and like make each of these like crazy little movements. Which that's what this blue stuff is, by the way, if anybody doesn't know. These are like movement paths that the nozzle's taking. So if you press play, it'll show you kinda. So starts, moves, extrudes, comes around, follows the path, extrudes, and then each of these blues is each time that basically it's retracting the filament and moving somewhere. So this is the path that it's heading. So you can kind of get an idea, you know, if your printer isn't tuned in and you have a lot of stringing going on, this is where all of the stringing will occur. Like you'll know ahead of time before it even happens. So infill line distance basically is a multiple of the density, so it sets it to 16. Infill pattern grid, this seems to be the fastest and one of the best as far as not wasting a bunch of material. 45 grams, you could do gyroid. This would be my second option, but as I've read, the issue with this is all of this movement, all of this extra unneeded movement every time basically is just shaking the printer, because it's moving back and forth so quick side to side and trying to keep everything square, versus when you have this grid, it's doing very specific 90-degree movements within the infill, which allows you to bump the speed of the infill up and still not have to worry about compromising the integrity of the model. Alright, so I have connect infill lines selected. Basically what that's going to do, that cuts down on my time saved a lot. It just essentially connects these two here, and it adds almost like a third wall. So this is a good option to also increase the strength of the model without having to like drastically increase the time or the material, because it will connect the infill automatically, so it will strengthen up a lot of these areas. I leave these alone. I don't really mess with these. Randomize, I don't mess with that. Infill line multiplier, I keep it 1. Infill overlap percentage 10%, same thing as kind of the skin overlap percentage. It just kind of melts these two in together so that they interlock. Wipe distance, same thing as before. It just kind of wipes it off before it continues. That way it keeps blobs and strings off of it. Infill before walls, I like to do that because it'll increase the quality of the print. And then skin edge support layers. This helps a lot if you have like large flat surfaces, kind of how I was explaining earlier, like here. Like this gives this skin 2 layers of support underneath of it for it to build itself on, which sometimes that's enough, sometimes it's not. Small areas like this, that might be fine, but if you have the infill cut down like this and say you needed to do this entire piece in one go, odds are the printer at some point would probably droop and fail, especially if you only had one skin selected. So having these skin edge support layers helps because it builds a foundation for the skin to lay on. So that was a setting that I found useful. Material, this is all, I mean, kind of based on your own preference. I mean, these are values that I try to shoot for, like a cooler temperature, because the hotter it gets, the faster the filament comes out, and it makes it harder to control the stringing and the blobs and things like that. So the first layer I'll put down at 205, which is on the warm side, I guess you could say, maybe on the warm to hot side. And then once it's going, I have it set on 195, and that is probably on the like cool to warm side. So I try not to bump the speed up too fast. I keep the speed down a little bit, and then I try to print at like this cooler temperature so that the filament is still melting properly, but it's not drooping off of itself and making bad quality prints. Build temperature, I just keep this at 60. It seems to work fine. You maybe bump this up a little bit if you're in like a cooler environment, I guess. Flow 96, 96, 96, 96. I have this all set to 96. I have the skin set to 97 just so that it pushes out a little bit more and kind of closes those gaps, and that's kind of how I get away with not having to worry about ironing as much, because I have a little bit extra coming out. And these numbers are based on flow tests and calibrating my machine, like I explained earlier. Speed. So I do have some modifications done, like dual gear extruder and things like that. But I mean, nothing crazy, and I also don't try to like go too far above and beyond. And like I said, you can always slow a lot of this stuff down and it will help you out. The only issue is, you know, if you're trying to print a bunch of stuff that you need to get ready, it might take you a year to print everything, and at that point it's just not feasible. So I'm trying to find a happy medium of like quality and speed. So print speed, I have it set to 60, and I kind of went through and messed with these a little bit. So infill at 80 because I'm not worried about it looking as pretty. Wall speed I set it 30. I have outer wall speed 40, inner wall speed 60, top surface skin speed 40, top bottom speed 40, travel speed 120, initial layer speed 30, initial layer print speed 40, initial layer travel speed 60, skirt and brim speed 30. So basically all of these settings are designed around keeping the infill fast to save time, and it isn't something I worry about as much. The outer wall needs to be pretty precise, so it's slowed down a good amount. The inner wall needs to be decently accurate in relevancy to the outer wall so that it doesn't push the outer wall out and make the outer wall look bad. So the inner wall is still a little quicker, but not, you know, not like the infill is. So let's see. Travel speed 120, basically this is just how fast the printer head moves. As long as everything's dialed in and zeroed out and works correctly, I mean the travel speed shouldn't be an issue. It shouldn't ever really knock into anything, or like that shouldn't cause any problems. Let's see, number of slower layers 1, so basically the first initial layer that it puts down is going to be a slow layer just to make sure that everything sticks to the build plate. Enable acceleration control. So basically what this will do is when the print head is ramping up to make movements, it will keep it from going too fast. So I set this all to 2500. And then that way, and then travel acceleration 5000, and then that way 2500, it's not moving too fast, again affecting the quality. Enable jerk control. So this basically is when it's moving fast, how fast it's able to stop and change directions. So I have it set to 8, infill set to 10, outer wall set to 7, and then the rest of it set to 8. Okay, travel. So enable retraction unless you're printing like in base mode or something like that. I don't know, like you would pretty much. Other materials might require you not using retraction, but for minis and terrain, you're definitely going to want to use retraction. Retracted layer change, I have that on just to kind of like help smooth things off a little bit. Retraction distance, I have this set at 7mm at 40mm a second. This seems to be what's good for me. There are stringing tests that you can run to kind of fine-tune your own printer and figure out what it is. I don't have a direct drive, I have a Bowden tube dual gear extruder, so these numbers could be different for you, especially if you have a direct drive. Maximum retraction count, I have this set to 20 within a 5mm window. So basically, in a 5mm square, I don't know exactly how much it is, something like that maybe, it'll only retract 20 times, which keeps from wearing down your filament and getting dust and grinding and things like that. Combing mode I have set to not on outer surface, which I've gone back and forth with some of these settings. This seems to be the best I've had with not getting any kind of like stringing and blobs on the outside. Some people do within Infill, and that seems to work fine, but for some reason not on outer surface works pretty good for me. Max comb distance with no retraction, 0.4 millimeters. Basically, if the nozzle is moving next to itself, it won't retract. So, retract before outer wall. Again, that's another thing, just to help kind of clean the print up. Avoid printed parts when traveling. Yeah, you want to do that. I don't ever use supports on any of the models that I have, so I don't have this on, but I mean, I guess you could use this if you have a model that has like heavy supports or anything like that. I just kind of leave this at whatever it was at. Cooling, enable printer cooling, yes. Fan speed 100%, regular fan speed 100%. So on PLA, you want to keep the fans up because you basically want it to kind of cool as it's going down. So I have those set pretty high. By the time it gets to the second layer, it's pumping out 100%. First layer, it's pumping 10%, I believe. Where's it? Okay, so on the first layer, it's not pumping anything. There, yeah, keeping it hot, letting it adhere to the build plate. Once it's on the build plate, gets a couple layers down, and then it'll start cooling it. If it goes hot to cold too quick, it'll warp, and that's when you get peeling up from the bed and things like that. Again, I don't use any supports, so I don't do too much with that. I can make another video on that, but I'm not the best on the supports. I try to avoid them at all costs. Build plate adhesion type, skirt, which is this blue line down here. Basically, it just puts a line around the object away from the object. So I have it set to one line all the way around the object, 3 millimeters from the object, and then say I print like a small thing, it's going to extrude 250 millimeters regardless. Which, I mean, I don't typically print anything that's that tiny, so it usually makes one full lap around. Sometimes it'll make two, but those are what I use. Some people like to use rafts. I just don't like having to cut and sand and deal with all that. And again, I mean, if your printer's dialed in and things are correct, I mean, a lot of this stuff, I mean, it's just preference, I guess. But I'm trying to at least hopefully give you guys an idea in the future of what you can use. There's also this experimental section. If you want, you can mess around in here with some stuff. Some people use adaptive layers. So, see, 4 hours, 48 minutes, 45 grams. Use adaptive layers. Basically, what that'll do is it'll change the layer height throughout the model as it sees fit, depending on how much detail it thinks it needs in any one spot. So, as you can see, uses about, you know, a little bit less filament maybe, but takes significantly longer to do. Which, if you have the patience and you got all the time in the world, or you're only, you know, you only need to print 1 or 2 of these or whatever, that's fine, you know. Some models you can spend less time on, some models you can spend more time on. But, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, it's going to get sanded and painted over. So, I mean, a lot of the detail, like at 0.2 and at 0.15, I mean, you're not going to see a significant difference in the model unless it has high details all over it. So like these. Once they're painted up, they look fine. So, but that's it for this video. I hope this helped everyone. If anything I said was useful, please leave a comment and give me a like, let me know. I also have a Patreon, an Etsy store, Instagram, all of the good stuff. So if you guys want to go check me out there, give me some support, I would appreciate it. It'll give me some incentive to make more and better videos in the future, I guess, higher production quality. If you guys have any questions, just shoot me a message. I mean, I'll be more than happy to help. I've gotten a few requests to do this, so I figured I would make this video. Sorry it's a little long, but if you stuck through with me to the end, I appreciate you. And please, please, please let me know what you guys would like to see, so that I don't feel like I'm just talking to thin air here. Alright, thanks guys.